Maine is the whitest state in the United States. I checked it again. It beats Vermont by 0.1%. And if you do a polling of refugees in refugee camps in Africa and Middle East and wonder which state in the United States would you like to come to, Maine comes as number one. And I don't know what that is, but it's a huge tribute to the state. This is the only thing about refugees I'm going to say all morning, because you have heard better experts on refugees talk about refugees all the time. I'm going to speak to what Bill Clinton would like to call this business of immigration debate. Why is it that immigration debate that used to be in the margins of our domestic policy has become the center stage of our domestic policy? Why is it that something that should be confined to a few social workers and immigration lawyers in the basement of churches has now become the main issue in our politics? Why is it that Donald Trump essentially launched his campaign, and you could say sustained and won his campaign on immigration of his presidency on the basis of immigration? Why is it that in the last 5 straight years, every single state in this country has introduced and passed bills dealing with immigration? Why is it that every year Supreme Court issues 2 or 3 major decisions on immigration? Essentially, sort of why has immigration become the third rail of American politics? This is one of those issues where it's obviously a combustible combination of facts, policy, and politics. You would probably tell me that's probably true for everything that we know of, but since I know nothing about gun control or drug addiction policy in Maine, I'll just stick to immigration. Let me start with a dash of history. Because if we don't, history is the only thing we can learn anything from. We are a nation of immigrants, but we have always been ambivalent about immigration. People will tell you that George Washington himself said that the country did not need any more immigrants except for a few talented carpenters. Ben Franklin, one of the most erudite founding fathers, warned the country in 1755 that this was going to be Germanizing of America if we let more Germans in, because he thought the Germans did not share the liberal political tradition of America. No offense to Jared if he's in the audience. In 1860s, the Know Nothing Party was launched against Irish and the Catholics. I recently checked, the Know Nothing Party got more votes than Donald Trump got in his primary election. And pardon the pun about the Know Nothing, but till 1875, despite all the ambivalence, we had no federal law in this country to control immigration. There were some state laws which were turned down by the Supreme Court, no federal law to control immigration. It was only in 1875 Congress said that we would not welcome certain people, not limits. We didn't like paupers, we didn't like prostitutes, we didn't like people who were criminals, we didn't like people who would become criminal charges, or people who would bring tuberculosis. Qualitative limits, as I call them. In the same spirit of qualitative limits, for the first time in 1882, we established the Chinese Exclusion Act, talking about bans. We forbid any new Chinese from coming after they had built our railway system across the nation. We extended that to all of Asia a few years later, talking about bans. We did this a long time ago. But it was only in the last decade of the 19th century and the first decade of the 20th century that the country got anxious about immigration. And this was mostly about Southern and Eastern Europeans. This is about Jews, Italians, and theories of eugenics were sold as confirmed science that certain people were inferior to others. And Congress, for the first time in 1921, imposed the national origin quota system, which favored Western and Northern Europeans over Southern and Eastern Europeans. For the first time, we put quantitative limits on immigration. And it was intended, obviously, to favor one group of people over the other. The national origin quota system remained our law till 1965. It was done over President Truman's, it was done over President Wilson's veto. Efforts to repeal it did not succeed under President Truman's veto. It was only John Kennedy who, in his campaign for presidency, promised that America would open itself to the world. President Kennedy did not live to see the end of the national origin quota system. President Johnson actually passed the national origin quota system. Again, a bit of history. Johnson did not like to pass the national origin end of quota. He had voted for it in 1952. But in the strong Johnsonian style, there's a lovely book written by a veteran NPR reporter called Tom Gelton, called Nation of Nations, where he describes about how Johnson decided to do it. Johnson called all his aides and told them, what did President Kennedy want to do? Because I'm in this place only because he was killed. And one of the things that was told to Johnson is that Kennedy had offered to open America to the world. And he said, that's going to be one of the goals. And in a classic Johnsonian way, he hammered down the Southern Democrats' throats and made Ted Kennedy be the senator to shepherd the bill on the Senate. I must all tell you that more Republicans voted to end the national origin quota system than Democrats did. And one of the classic colloquies on the Senate floor, Senator Kennedy was asked, don't you think it's going to change the ethnic complexion of our country? And Senator, not much. Senator Kennedy was asked many times whether he believed that statement or no. But like all good politicians, he never answered the question. 50 years later, we are more a nation of immigrants as a result of the 1965 Act than we have ever been. And that's your story. Today, we have 43 million people who are foreign-born in this country. That's about 13% of our population. Absolute terms, the largest number, if you talk about per capita of the population, this is not the peak. The per capita of the population is again going to be the beginning of the 20th century, a time I'll come back to a few times in this presentation. At that time, it was about 15% of our population. Now, where do these people come? This is not a national phenomenon. Immigration in our country is actually not spread all over the country. For a good part of our history, immigration was fundamentally a 6-state phenomenon: California, New York, Illinois, Texas, Florida, New Jersey. It's only recently, I think only 2 years ago, that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts had joined the good club of immigrants of more than 1 million people. But 67% of our immigrants live in these 7 states. About 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, it was about 76%. But as all astute demographers will tell you, it's not the absolute numbers that matters, it's the rate of change that matters. And this is where you say the rate of change. That where there has been more than 270% increase in our foreign-born population, it's in the North Carolinas to Alabamas of the world. Now, where do these people come from? This is the list of countries from Mexico to Guatemala, where predominant number of our immigrants today are coming from. If you go to 1965, when Senator Kennedy passed that bill, this was a picture of the country. People came from Italy to Hungary. The only country on both those lists is Mexico. Now, I don't have to tell you too much about what that kind of reverse in our racial mix means to certain sections in our population. What is most important fact in the political debate about the mix is that for the first time, about 25% of a foreign-born population is unauthorized. That level was never true. In fact, if I had shown this slide about 5 years ago, about 1/3 of our foreign-born population would be unauthorized. That number has systematically gone down, a bit on that later. Now, where do these undocumented, if you look at this chart, this will tell you a good part of the political map of the country. There are 12 states in the country where at least 1/3 of the foreign-born population is unauthorized. The darker shades there will tell you more than 40% of the foreign-born population in those states is unauthorized. So for a lot of these states, Their introduction to immigration is extremely recent and has come in the form of the unauthorized population. Not surprising that almost all these 12 states are the ones that voted for Donald Trump in the last election. Now, this I talked about a slowdown in our immigration. This has systematically been going down since 2007. We have reduced from 12.2 to 11 million unauthorized people in the country. Still obviously a large number, but not what it used to be 5 years or 6 years ago. Now, these are the regions of the world where the unauthorized come from. Obviously, it's a hugely Mexican and a Central American phenomenon. About 72% come from these two regions. And these are, you say, how we know? Are these people who just come recently? But this is the number that tells you how rooted the unauthorized population communities are. About 59% of the unauthorized in the country have lived here for more than 10 years. So if we talk about deporting all these people, we have to look at how entrenched and deep-rooted these communities are. And the number that sort of touches all heartstrings all the time, that there are about 5.1 million children who live in the household where there's at least one unauthorized person. 4 million of these are US citizens. So if we talk about deporting 11.2 million people, we have to obviously think about deporting a large number of citizens along with them. Now, all these facts are true about immigration in general. Now, this is the story about our labor force. Today, 17% of our civilian labor force is foreign-born. But if you look at the low-wage sector of our labor market, it's about 53%. And a large number of them are unauthorized. And of course, there's also a story on the other side of the spectrum, which I'll talk about a little later. Now, what is responsible for the presence of so many immigrants, and especially the unauthorized, in our labor market? First is the state of our labor market in general. In 1990, the last time Congress visited immigration, members of our Congress were convinced by a 10-page document written by a consulting firm. I was present, telling members of Congress America no longer needs low-wage, low-skilled workers, that all we need are computer geeks and people on Wall Street. That's what the economy needs. I have nothing against Wall Street yuppies. They're my best friends in New York. But we know that the big growth in our labor market did not happen on Wall Street. It happened in the service sector of our economy. Everything from hospital care, elder care, agriculture, janitorial work, and construction. And these are unfortunately also the low-wage sector of our economy, where our wages have been consistently going down since the 1970s, a platform both on which Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump appease large number of people. So given the wages, many Americans simply are not interested in these jobs. Now, the second part is we are becoming an aging society. We're fast getting the trappings of American societies, of European societies, and Japan. I don't have to remind all of you that the baby boomers started retiring in 2001. 10,000 baby boomers retire a month in our country. By 2020, all 78 million baby boomers will be over the age of 55. By 2030, all of them will be over the age of 65. By 2030, 1/3 of our country is going to be over the age of 55. So if you want to support an economically active labor force, we obviously need an infusion of people. And this infusion is not needed anywhere more than to address the shortfalls in our Social Security system. And this is where I think the contribution of immigrants, especially the unauthorized, is least appreciated in our society. Our Social Security Administration since the 1930s has been keeping a strange file called the Social Security Suspense File, in which it takes in credit for all workers where contributions come in, but there is not a valid Social Security number to which they can attribute that to. By definition, by most analysts, those are unauthorized people who did not have Guess what the number on the Social Security suspense file today is? It's $1.2 trillion. Trillion dollars. So those of us who are concerned about the future of our Social Security system, we might as well thank some unauthorized people on our way out. So we're also becoming a much more educated society. Again, in my term, the beginning of the 20th century. In the beginning of the 20th century, only 10% Americans graduated high school. Today, 85% of Americans graduate high school. That's obviously very good news for the country, but it has consequences in the labor market. That if you're a high school diploma holder, your ambition is not going to be flipping hamburgers at McDonald's or going to do the work in the fields. So if you look at the combination of these factors, it's not surprising that large number of immigrants and large number of unauthorized immigrants have entered and become part of our labor market. Now, you would ask me, well, but this is all true, then why aren't these people coming legally if we need them? This is where we have the outdated immigration selection system. Today in our country, we have a selection system that was written in 1952. We have a 1952 architecture for a 21st century global economy for our labor market. Obviously not sustainable in any way. And we see evidence of that in our legal permanent system. As Tim rightly pointed out, we take about 1 million people a year for green cards. This is the distribution of that 1 million people on family and on economic-based system. But if you look at how people in these are waiting to come legally in these streams, if you're a family-based immigration, you want to bring if a US citizen wants to bring his adult son or daughter, if you're from Mexico, it takes you 21 years in the back line. If you're from Philippines, it takes you 11 years. If you're a brother or sister from some of a US citizen from the Philippines, it takes you 23 years to wait in the in the backlog. The similar, not as bad, is true of our employment-based system. That if you're coming to work for a job for which you require a master's degree, these are like the IBMs of the world are prepared to sponsor you. If you're from India and China, your wait is 4 years or 8 years. If you're coming for an occupation in which at least the requirement is a bachelor's degree, your wait is 11 years for India and 3 years for China. So not just on the unauthorized, but on the legal immigration system, this is what we call, has happened, a broken immigration system that we have inherited. Now, this is all facts. These are not disputed. You could be pro-immigrant, anti-immigrant. These are facts. Now, the policy. How do we respond to this? Everyone understands that Tim pointed himself that there are elements of this policy in which there is significant agreement. We need some mechanism to legalize these people. We can disagree on whether they should be citizens immediately or over long term, but we have to get people out of the shadows. We obviously have to have a better enforcement system because 10 years from now, we don't want to be back with 11.2 million unauthorized people, and that mostly means better enforcement in the workplace. And we need to create a more robust flow of future immigrants who can respond to the labor market needs. Listen, we change our interest rates in the country every quarter, but we don't change the number of people we admit. For 25 years, the last time we visited this was in 1990. Obviously not a sustainable phenomenon. Now, people will say, well, we cannot do this kind of immigration reform unless we bring immigration unauthorized under control and improve enforcement. And you heard from many panelists yesterday that we have spent more money on immigration enforcement than we have spent on a combination of FBI, ATF, Secret Service, Food and Drug Administration, TSA, combined than we spend on immigration enforcement. It's our report about 2 years ago that we spent $18.4 million on immigration enforcement. And guess what? We have been removing people at a rate that no one wants to acknowledge. President Obama became the deporter-in-chief, as immigrant advocates like to call him, in 2013 for the largest number of removals in the country. And guess what? The apprehensions from Mexico, the crossing of the border, has now today at 40-year low reached in the last year. So we have increased enforcement, we have increased removals, and our border is much better controlled than it has been, and we still do not have immigration reform. And basically what explains this is politics. Politics is front and center to this entire debate. I don't have too much time to talk about where do you start the line on politics. I like to say that the modern immigration debate started in 2000 when President Bush got elected in the US and President Fox got elected in Mexico. Both leaders wanted to had strong roots together in Texas and across Mexico. President Bush, in his famous statement that we should have an immigration policy where a willing worker is matched with a willing employer. And proposals were bipartisan proposals, were ready. President Fox was actually going to address the joint session of Congress on September 12th, and the day before 9/11 happened. For the next 6 years, our entire immigration debate was sealed with national security. It became the complete prism through which we started seeing immigration. Congress started debating rather tentatively immigration bills, but with strong bipartisan support, mostly led by Senator Kennedy and Senator McCain in 2006 and 2007. Senate actually passed an immigration bill in 2006. By the time we reached 2007, Senator McCain was already running for the presidential election in 2008. And it became impossible for him to be active on immigration. We had 2008 election. President Obama got elected for the first time in our history. The son of a foreign student became president of the United States. He was a constitutional scholar, and we thought this is going to happen any time. But he inherited a deep recession. It became impossible for any member of Congress to say that we should legalize 11.2 million people when the country was having such high level of unemployment. We came to 2012. A lot of people think President Obama won 2012 by a landslide election. He won every single battleground state. He won the Latino vote by 72%. And people started seeing in the Latino vote the new sort of measure through which you look at election. John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, who had used four-letter words to describe comprehensive immigration reform, suddenly started giving standing ovations to President Obama at the State of the Union when he would talk about immigration. As a gang of 8 members of the Senate, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, composed a bill which passed by 68 senators in the summer of 2013. We don't have 68 votes on almost anything in Congress these days. A comprehensive immigration reform. It went to the House and it hit a big wall. And it was clear that there were actually votes in the House to pass the Senate bill. If Democrats and Republicans together pooled their votes, there were votes to pass the bill. But it was never even brought up for a vote, because the rule of the House now comes from Speaker Hastert, that unless the caucus of the Republican Party supports a bill, it cannot even come to the floor. The caucus did not support the bill. And guess who votes to elect the Speaker? It's not the House of Representatives, it's the caucus. So John Boehner, looking at his own election, did not even allow the bill to come. As Senator Lindsey Graham, one of our more colorful senators, likes to say, every immigration bill is a jobs bill. It's my job. You can't get more retail in immigration politics than that. So we come to 2014. Since no action had happened in Congress in 2012 and after 13, President Obama came under huge pressure to do something for the 11.2. And he issued a set of executive actions which would give them some relief from removal. It was obviously 26 states of the country brought a legal action against it, and the Supreme Court in 2016 enjoined that particular executive order. The country obviously was completely divided on the executive amnesty and became very problematic for the president. And in 2016, we know what happened. I just want to tell you a strange anecdote. The Republicans who saw 2012 as an important reason to start working on immigration because of the Hispanic vote. Karen Tumulty, who is a Washington Post reporter, told me this recently, that the same week as the Republican establishment was meeting to discuss how we should code the Hispanic vote, a man called Donald Trump made an application to the US Patent Office to patent to make America great again. He had read the same election completely differently, and we know how that story ended. Just to be completely sort of some evidence about how divided our country is, if you look at the platform of the Republican Party in 2016, they could not find a single immigrant that they liked. Legal, illegal, high skill, low skill, refugee, otherwise. If you look at the platform of the Democratic Party, they could not find a single enforcement measure that they could embrace. If you look at the division of the country on these parties, it's as good as you can get. But while this collapse obviously is now we have a paralysis in this country, the status quo raises extremely troubling issues about our country, about our interests, about our values. What kind of respect for rule of law do we have when good employers on a daily basis have to wink and nod at the law to hire an unauthorized worker whom they actually want to hire legally? What kind of national cohesion do we have if 25 states of the country support executive action and 25 countries oppose it? I come from the state of New York, where you have two neighboring counties, Suffolk and Nassau, in Long Island, which have diametrically opposite views on immigration. This is not good for national cohesion. And finally, what kind of moral values are we espousing if we tell an unauthorized person, we trust you with taking care of our infant, we trust you with taking care of our elder grandmother, but we don't trust you with membership in society? These are deeply troubling American values at stake. Let me end on a note of optimism. And strangely, my optimism comes from history, the same sort of dash of history I started on. When national origin quota system was introduced, the things people said on the floor of the House about Italians and Jews and Eastern Europeans would be unprintable today. But that group of immigrants ushered in our own industrial revolution and gave birth to the major cities of America. I would suggest that today's wave of immigration is much more momentous than that wave was for two reasons. One, it's much more skill-based diverse than it was. Educated and middle-class Europeans did not move to the United States, except for Jews who were being persecuted. They were mostly working-class, poor people. If you look at our today's immigration is much more high-skilled, much more educated, much more entrepreneurial. Some of these facts Tim already pointed out. 1/4 of our medical doctors today are foreign-born. About 2/5 of our medical scientists are foreign-born. 1/3 of our computer engineers are foreign-born. About 53% of PhDs in computer science and math and engineering are foreign-born. If you look at the startup companies, which I think Tim pointed out in Silicon Valley, 51% of our startup companies in Silicon are started by a foreign-born person. If you look current list of the 40% of the Fortune 500 companies have been started either by an immigrant or a child of an immigrant. And this is the diversity of our flow, which doesn't get mentioned when people are talking about walls and criminals and rapists. And the other point of our boys more momentous is the diversity racial, religious, ethnic of this new wave of immigration. We have never had more diversity in our immigration stream. I come from New York City. On a daily basis, kids from 193 countries of the world get up in the morning to go to a public high school in New York. Now, you think that's New York. I talked to Ali Mashkili, one of your celebrated refugees yesterday. He told me in Portland, there are kids who have from 47 different languages. This is Portland. New York City is getting replicated all across the United States. We have become, as Ben Wattenberg, a conservative thinker in this world, would say, the world's first universal society. The challenge is, are we up to this diversity or no? I think we have great news here. While the rest of the world, we heard a lot of evidence of that in the last 2 days, has become increasingly a more tribal place. Conflicts in Balkans and Africa and South Asia and East Asia. We have gone brilliantly in the opposite direction in this country. We bring people from all parts of the world, from conflict zones, and we put them in Brooklyn, and they all seem to get along well. And there is something about the process of immigration where these old animosities seem to melt away. And there is something about the chemistry of immigration in the US that is uniquely transforming, and if I may say so, uniquely American. In the process of immigration, immigrants seem to transform themselves. But we, by accepting immigrants, as well are constantly transforming our own country. This new, more diverse pool of immigrants today bring different memories. They bring honoring different traditions. But they, in the process, they strengthen our economies, they enrich our culture, and most importantly, remind us of the promise and freedom and opportunity for all. Thank you so much.